Program Chair for CFA Society of Cleveland. Before I introduce our guest speaker here today, I want to make a couple of announcements. One is next week, next Wednesday, we'll have Adam Berger, our speaker from Speaker Weekend program, coming from New York and talking about economy with us. The other thing is we have membership survey coming out for the CFA members this afternoon. So if you can take a few minutes from your busy schedule and get us the response. The deadline for that is 25th of this month, but you can do it today. That would be really great. With this, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker here today, Mr. Mark Filippell from Western Reserve Partners. Mark is the Managing Director for Western Reserve Partners, and Mark has spent about 22 years in investment banking, during which he personally completed over 125 mergers and acquisition transactions. Prior to joining Western Reserve Partners, he was the Managing Director and managing the Mergers and Acquisition Department in KeyBank Capital Markets and McDonald Investments. Prior to running KeyBank's M&A department, Mr. Filippell led the bankruptcy and distress practice, business practice. He's been a personal mentor to me for the past 9-10 years. With this, it's my pleasure to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Mark Filippell.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I had the pleasure of speaking to this group about 3 years ago, and the topic was the M&A environment and how you didn't know if it was Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. And unfortunately, we found out for a while it was Mr. Hyde. But it's a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Amit for inviting me to speak, and I appreciated that, and he showed a lot of initiative in doing that. Also joining me are Jeff Hirsch and Amy Vandenberg from our shop, who helped put this all together, and are as much a part of these slides as I am in the effort. I understand you want to wrap up at a reasonable time, something like 1:10, and then some questions after, and I don't have any problem with that. I always recall the case that when people say you've only got so much time, is that when Lee and Grant got together at Appomattox, as the Civil War had been going on for 4 years, 630 people had been killed, 1 million wounded, the whole country was ripped apart, worst conflagration in our history. Well, they met at Appomattox, they went together in the house, they exchanged pleasantries, they sat down, they discussed the general issues of how to surrender and how to end the war. They wrote up a rough draft of the document. Lee made some edits to it. They agreed to them. They final copied the whole thing. They both signed it. They shook hands on it, and then they departed. And the whole meeting took an hour and a half. And I figure if General Lee and General Grant can resolve the Civil War in an hour and a half, we can certainly resolve this meeting in an hour and a half, since we have a much more modest agenda. So let me dive right in. I was told sometimes questions at the end. Please, just give me questions anytime. We'll take them at the end, too, since it will follow the thread of what we're doing. Today's M&A market, I'm saying the phoenix is being reborn. This is a phoenix. And the phoenix is a mythical bird in Chinese, Egyptian, and Greek mythology. It's the fire spirit with a colorful plumage and a tail of gold and scarlet. It has a 500 to 1,000-year life cycle, near the end of which it builds itself into a nest of twigs and then ignites. Both the nest and the bird burn fiercely and are reduced to ashes, from which a new young phoenix arises, reborn anew to live again. I didn't know that until recently, but that's why we have Phoenix, Arizona. It's reborn from the fire of the desert. And that's sort of what's happened in our M&A market today. Because if we look back, as we're going to see, a year ago, year and a half ago, but specifically 6 months to a year ago, the M&A market was dead. It was like the ashes. It was fire. Because to make M&A happen, you need 3 things. You need a willing buyer and a willing seller and a willing financial source to make the transaction happen. And if we looked back 6 months or a year ago, we did, specifically a year ago, 1 year from today, we didn't have people who wanted to sell because values had plummeted so much that they didn't want to sell. We didn't have people wanting to buy because they were terrified that things were going to get even worse. We didn't have banks who wanted to finance anything, so that wasn't going to happen. And the net effect of all that is the only M&A that was happening were deals that had to happen, where they were already signed, where they were strategic, where something had to happen or was already done. Very little of anything else as the whole financial system was frozen. So let's look. What was it like in 2009 versus 2010? A year ago, and man, it sounds like 100 years ago, the Great Recession was in full swing. Terrible forecast of what was going to happen. The Dow had just recovered from about 6,500. It was up a little bit, but it was still very, very low. People were pretty shell-shocked. M&A deals, certainly new M&A deals, were at a standstill. The debt markets were frozen. We had a very active business just helping companies find revolving credit. We had a couple of clients come in and they'd say, our bank is terminating our line of credit as it expires. How are you doing? We're doing fine. We have lots of collateral. We are very successful. We're profitable through the recession. But they said, we have 50 lines of credit expiring in 2 months, and we're just terminating them all because we have to recover more capital to get our ratios in shape for the federal authorities. So all 50 lines of credit that are coming up for renewal are all being terminated, and we've done that for the last few months. We're going to do it the next few months to meet the various federal requirements. Well, shoot, in that environment, you can't even get a line of credit, never mind get acquisition finance. The problem loans that the banks had, or loans that had any questions at all, or in violation of any covenants, the banks wanted to call them, but they couldn't because the people couldn't pay the loans. And we had case after case after case where you couldn't even refinance anything. You couldn't even take it through a bankruptcy and get anybody to buy because most people were saying the door is closed. The word with many banks we kept hearing was extend, amend, and pretend. Because if they did anything else, they'd get nothing for their loan. There was a $400 billion overhang of uninvested private equity capital, but the buyout firms were terrified to spend it. They didn't know if prices were going to drop even more. They couldn't get bank financing, so they were just stopped. Some of them in town, and I'll mention one, Resilience, with Bass and Mansour, they did a land office business because they were set up to buy distressed and bankrupt entities and companies with financial troubles. But most of the other financial sponsors here and across the country, they don't think that way. And they raise the money saying they were going to invest in and buy successful businesses. So they can't buy unsuccessful businesses. They don't know how, and they've told their limited partners that's not what they're in business to do. So it'd be as if they took the money for one purpose and used it for something else. So they're just frozen. The public equity markets were terrible, and the public companies didn't want to buy anything. They were just hanging on to their shoes. They didn't know how much lower they were going to go. And we'd call people with strategic ideas, and they'd say, no, we just can't. We're not buying anything right now. Period. Done. Door closed. Prospective sellers on the other side would just say, no, we're not going to sell now. Prices, and there's too much upheaval. And quite honestly, that was our advice to them too. This is not the time you want to sell your business if you don't absolutely have to, because there's such turmoil right now, you won't get a value. And one thing happened to people that made me more worried is that the low capital gains and dividend and income tax rates were being forecast that they're going to expire at the end of 2010. So everybody knows they're going to go up. So here's everybody knowing that we have low taxes, but on the other hand, they're going to go up as soon as the recession works its way through. Where are we today? M&A is rebounding on a selective basis. Not all companies, but there is a significant rebound going on. But what we call basically trophies and train wrecks. Trophy companies, successful niche operations, have patented operations, have profits. Good companies are selling fine. They're selling at excellent prices. We're selling a number of companies right now and getting terrific prices. Practically as good as anything we would have gotten at the peak of the market. But they're wonderful companies. It's as if people want to buy Rolls Royces and Cadillacs, but if you show up with a Chevy or a Pontiac or an Oldsmobile, they just sort of look at you. But they'll pay for the Cadillac or the Rolls Royce. The other things they're selling are train wrecks. A lot of the companies that had problems where you were seeing extend, amend, and pretend. Now the banks and all the players are saying, okay, there's enough of a market now where we can restructure, where we could take it through a bankruptcy and sell it and get a pretty good recovery on our capital. So let's quit putting off the day of judgment. Let's do it. So we see an interesting kind of a barbell effect in the market. The very successful, very profitable trophy companies, and then some companies with a lot of problems, but at least the banks say, shoot, we're going to push the process now because we've got a window and we can't just keep piling this stuff up in problem loans. So let's make a decision and let's go ahead. And maybe the bank takes a hit, maybe not, but at least it's an instantly better recovery than would have been a year ago. And they're kind of want to get out of the pretending business. Credit markets, social signs of life, it's not great. It's still hard to get financing in the middle and lower market, much easier at the top, but at least there is activity. You can get loans, and the banks do want to make profits. One interesting thing is for investment-grade debt and just under investment-grade, you can actually get extremely attractive long-term rates. Ken Hirsch in our shop has been doing a land office business, companies who can get 6%, 6.5%, 10-year paper for triple B from private issuers. And it's a very good way to get low-cost financing because the Fed is pumping money in so cheap, and people don't have a good alternative where to put it. So they'll put it very attractive rates. And now the banks are catching up, saying, "Hey, we better make loans." You see some restructuring in and out of bankruptcy. There's now a $425 million overhang of equity capital. $400 billion of equity capital that's been raised. And we all know the dynamics of these funds. If they raise a $100 million fund, a buyout group, financial sponsor, be it for healthy deals, not so healthy deals, it's usually a 10-year life. They have to invest the money by the 4th or the 5th year. They might nurture it, do some things over the next 3 or 4 years, but they've got to be making exits by year 6, 7, 8, because by year 10 they've got to be done. They've got to get the money back. Now maybe they can extend it a year or two, but if they don't spend the money, they don't invest it. They have to give it back, and that's really tough if you're a buyout firm. It's sort of like if you go to a carnival for your children's school, for example, and everybody's buying tickets to go on the rides, and they make an announcement at about 9:30 that at 10 o'clock the carnival closes, and any unused tickets are not good the next day. Well, at that point, you're looking at this ribbon of tickets that you bought. You've got to spend those tickets. Now, maybe you were online to take the roller coaster, but the line's too long. Okay, let's go to the merry-go-round. Oh, that's not so busy. Okay, let's go to the bumper boats. But you've got to spend those tickets, or they're worthless. And I've had some interesting conversations with my son over the years about what ride we're going to go on because the tickets are useless. That's sort of the problem that the financial sponsors get, where if they don't spend the money, they have to give it back, and they never get to carry, never get to carry. Well, they've been sitting for a year and a half where they haven't been able to use it. And so they've really worked their way down the line on those funds, and that's a very interesting dynamic. We had some groups call us who say, we've got to make acquisitions. Just show us what you've got. Because we don't, we have to spend it back. We're seeing continued recovery in the equity markets, and public companies now are buying and bidding and calling us. It's a totally different environment. If you're a public company, your stock was 100 and it dropped to 50, well, now it's back up to 80. But it's a whole new psychology, because now the stock's where it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. They're all right. They think there's a world tomorrow. And what the net effect is having on sellers is it's mostly with trophy properties, but a lot of them see a second chance at the brass ring. They were kicking themselves. We had some clients and prospective clients scold us. Why didn't you make me sell 3 years ago? Oh, I'm sorry. It's your decision. We can give you the alternative, but we can't make you do anything. And if we did, then when we did that, you said, oh, you're just pushing me to sell. No, it's your decision. Well, now, why didn't you make me sell? Well, now, there was a period of a year and a half or so where they couldn't sell, just couldn't do it. Now there's another chance, and maybe they can't get everything they would have gotten before, but they can get 80 or 90% of what they would have had before. Wow, that's a whole different environment than, oh, maybe I can get that much more. They're just so thrilled that they've got a business to sell and that things are turning out better. The other factor influence those people is capital gains rates are going up next year by law. The Bush tax cuts expire in 10 years unless they're renewed. We saw everything that happened in Congress, in the Senate, with the healthcare bill where you need 60 votes. You're never going to get 60 votes to extend lower capital gains rates. I mean, can you imagine 60 people getting together and saying we want to keep taxes low on capital gains? It's impossible. So when those extend, capital gains rates go from 15 to 20% instantly, and individual income tax rates go from about 35 up to 39.6 instantly. And that doesn't even factor in all the costs of the healthcare bill. So that's another factor influencing sellers. Say, gee, I can do it, and if I sell now, I pay less taxes than if I sell 7 months from now. And we've done a lot of calculations with people, and they say, gee, maybe I don't get everything I want, but even if I get 15% more a year from now, taxes are going to eat up so much of it, maybe I just go now. So that's changed the whole psychology. So we got buyers more interested and sellers more interested, and banks not great, but putting money in selectively, and it all is working a lot more business. Let's just look. We said M&A activity hit bottom in late 2009. It's actually worse than these charts show, because a lot of the business happened in the first part of the year, and the more the year went on, the worse it got. And we will say, and we were kind of debating how many charts we had, for very large deals, right, $1 billion plus, the spigot stopped. It was down 90%. For middle market deals, and I'm going to say 25 to 250, the spigot dropped about half in the last 2 years. For small deals, under 25, things were only off about 10%. Well, why is that? Well, a lot of small businesses just change hands all the time. I mean, a small company worth $5 million and they sell it to the employees, or they sell to their neighbor down the street, or they sell a competitor, or, you know, I'll take an extreme example. Somebody's got a gas station and he's going to retire and he sells it to somebody else who wants it. Those deals just happen all the time. And in effect, the big deals, though, where the real money changes hands, those are the ones that stop precipitously. So if you look at this chart, you see here on the top one, the number of deals is the bar. This is on a 0 scale, but the line is the value. You see the line dropped by 2/3. And most of those transactions in 2009 took place in the first part of the year, and then it just stopped for the rest of the year. A lot of those deals in the first part were already signed up before the recession really hit. What we see now is, bringing it back, is acquisition multiples are rebounding. You see in 2009 where here in the first quarter, where you were looking at much lower multiples. This is EBITDA versus debt, I think. Here, they've already jumped up a lot. And so you see two factors that are bringing the sellers back in. First, EBITDA multiples are higher than they were, absolutely, than they were 6 months or 8 months or a year ago. Higher, they're not as high as they were, but they're still 3 years ago, but they're still up substantially. But compounding that is people are earning more money. The recession is ending. I mean, we're actually not technically in a recession anymore because we're seeing growth, and we still have very high unemployment, still a lot of problems. But the definition of a recession is when gross national product is declining for 2 quarters in a row or more. Well, now gross national product is actually going up a little bit, so it's a fragile situation, but it's not technically a recession anymore. So we see here that the change in earnings per share, which was way down, is increasing a little bit again. So we see it here across all our clients. You have a higher multiple that people will pay for, and there's more earnings that you're multiplying. And, you know, as Mae West said, too much of a good thing is wonderful. I mean, you get the two factors compound, and it's dramatically increasing the prices that companies are worth versus a year ago. We know all the public market is up. The market's up another, it was 80 points when we left. I don't know where it is this minute. So actually the stock market is pretty close to where it was 4 years ago. If you were Rip Van Winkle and fell asleep, you'd say, oh, market hasn't changed at all. The Dow's at about 11,000. I guess nothing happened. And that's how we got the book going, I guess. But that's up, and that's had a remarkable effect on public company acquirers. They feel much better. They're generally wanting to do deals with cash, not stock, because they've cut back so much that they've accumulated cash. So now they've got a lot of cash to spend. They also hate the bureaucratic and regulatory requirements of issuing stock in exchange for buying companies, especially smaller ones, middle market, because they just don't want to deal with it. And they've got the cash. but they feel good enough about the future that we see them as very active. Financial sponsors who are not, you don't see a lot of deals yet here, but I'm going to get to that in a second. They keep accumulating all this money, and they are frankly loaded right now. Ralph Delarada, one of my partners, and I just got back from Intergrowth, which is the Association for Corporate Growth's big conference they have every year. Actually, Ken Hirsch, one of our partners, was supposed to go, but we're working on something that's all come to a head. He couldn't go, so I filled in for him. I took one for the team and went down to Miami Beach for 3 days. Slogged through this thing. It was tough. That's what partners do. We look out for each other and cover. But we were down there a year ago, and they had 1,985 people attending Intergrowth. The year before, it was something like 1,300, and a lot of those were in a morbid state of depression. It was like a funeral. But the year before, it had been about 1,990. Interesting, almost exactly the same number. And the environment was just so different. All the buyout groups beating on our table, a line at our table. We want to talk to you about acquisitions. We're looking. We want to put money together. Corporations there, we're looking to buy things. Banks there, we want to make loans. Let's know. Ralph and I went to bed exhausted each night. We emailed each other. I mean, I'm just shaking. I'm so tired from making all these meetings, and people are emailing us at midnight. Could I meet you for breakfast or for a cup of coffee? We just want to explain to you why our bank wants to make loans. It's just a whole different environment, and the buyout groups were most aggressive of all. The problem I've got, though, is the banks are still relatively conservative. Now, compared to a year ago, they're incredibly aggressive. But compared to 3, 4, 5 years ago, they're still conservative. But they will make loans. I think it reminds me of that Eddie Youngman line. Remember the comedian? He used to always start his monologue with a joke about his wife. And my favorite was he'd say, guy comes up to me and he says, how's your wife? I said, compared to what? Well, how's lending? Well, compared to what? Compared to a year ago, and this is the 2009 figure, compared to a year ago, it's great. Banks will make loans. They will make acquisition loans. Compared to the multiples they would make about before, where you could get, 4 times EBITDA, you could get 4 times on trailing, and then another half a turn with mezzanine. Now, you're kind of looking at, for a good, healthy deal, maybe 2.5 times. But heck, 2.5 times, at least they'll make the loans. It's still very tough for smaller deals, but at least there is some activity. So how does the world work itself through this? Well, these equity groups have $425 billion. So instead of doing deals where they put up, say, 25, 30, 35% of the price in equity, and they leverage the rest, they're putting up 45, 50% of the deal in equity. We ran into dozens of groups now in the hardship area in Miami Beach, where we suffered through that conference in the 80-degree weather by the pool. We had group after group saying, we will fund the entire acquisition in equity, and we'll refinance it later when the banks are more willing. We just have to put the money to work. And man, that's a great environment to be in. Not a good environment if you're a competing bet. But I'm saying, they just said 6 months or a year from now, it'll be so much easier. And we came back with 10 groups that said, we want to buy companies, we'll pay for it all in equity, we'll refinance it later and roll it back in. Let's just do that. So they're just putting more equity in it, and that's how the equation. Price is a little lower than it would have been 3 years ago, but maybe it's 80 to 90% of the time. They over-equitize it, and we go on. This graph looks a little different. We got it from a different source. But this shows U.S. corporate lending. And again, one of my pet peeves, it's on a 0 scale. This isn't one of those where we grab the scale halfway up. But on a 0 scale, this is U.S. corporate lending. Non-LBO is the light color, and LBO is the black color. Look just a few years ago, how much, we're talking, and this is quarterly, but we're talking $60 billion of LBO lending in 1 quarter, and $20 billion of LBO lending in that quarter. Look how it dropped toward the end of into '09. I mean, it was almost nothing. And you figure the banks they were actually calling in money, not lending money. Now, it's not robust by any standards, but at least it's not those crazy numbers you saw before, but it's growing, and I'm very comfortable when this chart comes out, the next line will be up here someplace. And it's creeping back to a normal level. The thing you can always depend on is there's fear and greed. Well, there's greed. And in this case, greed, because bankers want to make money, and if they don't lend the money out, they don't make any money. And at some point, they realize that they can make good safe loans at more conservative guys, they can make money, and that's what they're trying to do. I went through it. More conservative capital structure. I'm going to touch quickly in the M&A market. Foreigners still see the cheap dollar. They're active. We see a lot more interest from foreign players than before. A lot of them are on the fence. They're actually, we're going around the clock with my partner Joe Carson. We're selling a company to a German company. They just beat off everybody. They're the best, and they're very comfortable with working over here. And it's like the economics right in front of us. The dollar's cheap. It's a quality company. They're in, and we're selling to the Germans. And we have a number of other things. We are very fortunate that we are now members of, have been the last 2 years, M&A International, which is a consortium of M&A firms from around the world. And it's invaluable because now we're dealing with them, and that volume is really increased as a proportion of the total. It's not as cheap, but it's not as cheap as it was. I mean, the euro is going through its convolutions, but it's compared to where it was years ago. But it's not as good. You're not seeing people just buy things just cheap. And with the European now, the Asians are still fine. They still think it's cheap, but it's not as good as it was. Going private transactions. Now, we would have thought with a low stock market, you'd see a lot of going private transactions. Not many. Look how that's dropped. Well, what happened was, and we dealt with a lot of them in our shop, is that when the price is so low, the boards of directors were just saying, we're not going to let somebody take the company private, and we're not going to be part of taking the company private when the stock price is so depressed. I mean, it's just wrong. The shareholders will revolt. It's not fair. It's not a fiduciary obligation. This is the wrong moment. Okay? So now they could do it. Now that the stock prices recover, it's still attractive in some cases, but the banks don't want to put up the money, so it's kind of hard to get financing to do it. So for one reason, it's sort of you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. We don't see a lot of going private transactions happening. A lot of them should happen. The regulatory burdens of Sarbanes-Oxley are a pain in the neck for small companies, but it's not nearly as active a business as it was. Not an area. But one thing that is surging is bankruptcies. Isn't that great? I don't think that's really good news, but in a way it is good news. Because what it means is, and look at that line. Isn't that great? It looks like my stock portfolio, but just turned upside down. And the reason that's happening, as I said, is that with values a little more stable, now people can go through a bankruptcy process and refinance or sell the assets in bankruptcy, and at least there's a way to do it. And that unlocks those assets for more productive use in the economy and kind of gets things moving. So it's actually a good thing that these bankruptcies take place because it allows the economy to move ahead. I put this chart in here. This shows tax rates. Because there's a lot of concern about increases in tax rates. A lot of people. And you see here where the bottom line, which is capital gains taxes, are going up, and income taxes will be going up. And it seems to me a lot of people are very worried about this. I'm not as worried about it because it's not as if, oh my goodness, this is a catastrophic thing that's never happened before. If you look historically, capital gains rates were at the 15% level for just a little, 8 years. Before that, it was 20%, 28%, 25%, 33%, many years at 25%. Went up higher. You have to go clear back to the 1920s before you see capital gains rates at the rates they are today. So whether you want them lower or not, it's not as if capital gains rates are going to some unprecedented high level. They're going they'll still be at a level below where they historically have been for most of the last 100 years. Income tax rates, After World War II, topped out at 91%. And then there were a number of years there where it was at 70%. Jack Kennedy cut it from 91 down to 70. And interesting enough, the Republicans at the time opposed him, saying we need the tax revenue. And he said it's just so confiscatory. People don't want to earn the money. They'll shelter it any which way. So you see how it's only recently, it's only in the last 30 years or so that they dropped to anything like what they are. You got to go clear back to the 20s. So even if it goes up to 39 or 40, you may not like paying it, and there's a whole lot of exclusions you don't get, so it makes the effective rate higher. But still, by historical standards, it's not off the chart. So I'm not personally worried that that kills the economy, given what's happened historically. So, in summary, we're dramatically rebounding from the Great Recession. Public companies are emboldened. Financial sponsors are dying to spend this $425 billion. Banks are still tight, but they will make some loans. Foreign buyers are cautious, but they like the relatively cheap dollar. And effective bankruptcy restructuring can happen. We're, well, it's in the press. We're going through a bankruptcy right now down in Kent with the Schwab company. It's all noticed up in the papers and in the bankruptcy records. And that could never have happened in the last year. I mean, there was just no way to do it. Now it can. In that case, that's a cement factory, and they're actually not located around here. But that process could not happen until we got the markets a little more fluid. And on the other hand, you have increased supply. Sellers been on the fence. Got what we call pent-up supply, where some people want to retire. They want to move on. It's time to do it. And they've been sort of waiting because they couldn't. Valuations are better. Deals can close, and tax rates are going to go up. And that influences some people. So what we see today, I probably didn't take this graph, is even though the numbers don't show a dramatic increase in the number of M&A deals getting closed or the values, take this to the bank. There are an awful lot of deals in process right now, and the lawyers are working overtime processing the paperwork that's in the purchase agreements. We are bringing in lots of new businesses where they say we want to sell. We hired a couple of new people in the last week. We did not lay anybody off during the recession, but we have a couple of people going to grad school, that type of thing. So we need more resources, which is a great problem to have. So right now, all the M&A work is sort of like the food going through a snake, where trust me, it's there, and you're going to see a lot of announcements in the next week. So here we see a nice little snake that just dined on a mouse, and this is a much prettier picture than the other one we saw on the internet of a boa constrictor that just ate somebody's cow and looks pretty gross in the weeds in the Amazon. So we chose the nice pretty one. But you see here, these are the M&A deals working their way through the system right now, and you're going to see a lot more announcements in the next months. And what I forecast will happen is once those deals all get announced, that will create that much more business, and will we see an unregulated boom like we saw 3 or 4 years ago? Probably not right away, but you will see increased recovery to kind of like a quasi-normal level by year end, just because people see deals getting closed, valuations come up, the banks make loans, they don't go bad, and the whole system just starts working again. And all through this, there's all this pent-up supply. There's people who want to retire. There's divisions that need to be divested because the parent company's going a different direction. And that's all been sort of building up. And now it has to move on to the next stage. So why don't we leave our little friend up there, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Excuse me, we have a microphone, and if you could please speak into it so the online people can hear. Thanks. Hi, in terms of the supply, excuse me, now, what do you think the balance is between deals that are coming out from sponsors as opposed to new deals that are fresh to the equity market?
When you say deals that are coming up, you mean how much your sponsors selling?
Liquidity event.
When we were down, I'm just going to give you my impression. We were down in Florida, and we met with 50 buyout firms one time or another. They all talked about having a lot of liquidity events on the horizon. A number of them were patting themselves on the back they got out of a lot of things 2 or 3 years ago, and oh man, they're very happy with themselves. The ones who didn't all had a laundry list of, we're going to sell this, we're going to sell that, we're going to sell that. In many cases, because the fund life is coming to an end, and they have to sell it. And maybe it's not perfect time, but it's good enough, and they've got to do it, and it'll kill their returns if they don't do it. However, overall, we see the financial sponsors as being much more aggressive as buyers than as sellers right now. They are so worried about putting all this money to work, and that's what they do. And it would be that Michelangelo had warehouses full of marble, and if he didn't carve, they're going to take the marble away. I mean, he'd be banging around statues like this. They want to get going, and they're more active as buyers right now than as sellers. I'm going to estimate they're going to want to buy 3 companies for every one that they sell right now. They're just very, their portfolios got depleted, and they didn't buy much for the last 2 years, and they are really hot to buy, and they just don't have as many things to sell as they sold them.
Thanks, Mark. I think this was very interesting. Can you also talk about which industries have you started seeing that more transactions coming? And what are the EBITDA multiples in those industries? I know last time you talked about textile, auto getting any changes.
From 3 years ago. Man, this is, be careful. There was a story about a wise senator, and he'd been in the Senate for 6 terms, and he never said much, and he never wrote much, but he'd been there a long time. And there's a young senator who's always giving speeches, always writing articles, and he's getting pilloried. And he goes to the old senator, and he says, how come you've been in here so long? How have you been able to do it? He says, I never say much, and I never write it down, and nobody can come back to me later with it. So I had to take advice from him and not make so many predictions. It is very hard to get anything done with a company that supplies domestic automotive. I mean, years ago, we used to do a lot of work with companies to supply the big 3. I don't even know where to go with that generally right now. I mean, unless you've got a branded product or some unique special thing, people are just cross it off. They don't want to touch it. We see what we're real active in. We see a lot of chemicals. We see a lot of niche manufacturing where they've got something proprietary, a lot of electronics. That's very active. There's terrific interest in software and software services, and what every single group seems to want to buy, I mean, it got to be a mantra, was medical and medical services and medical devices and hospital. I mean, the whole medical area is just exploding with interest at extraordinary multiples. I think the company had 5% of its sales in medical. They're going to call themselves a medical company because they think it's worth more. A big question a lot of people ask is, can they make it in China or India just as well? And if so, why do you ever want to touch a company in this country if now or 5 years or 10 years from now it'll be made someplace else? And medical is one area where medical services, you have to do it here. I mean, the people are here. That's what it means. So we see that as a big area. I don't have exact metrics on this industry versus that industry, but the big question is just always, if it's something that uses a lot of labor and is exportable, good luck. We sold a company, about 6 weeks ago, Partners in Plastics, a wonderful company down in Sharon Center, Ohio, and they do blow molding of plastic. And it's part for medical and part for toys and part for other things. Well, the beauty of it is, and the reason it works, is you can't really import blow molded products. Because blow molding is basically air. If you have a picture of milk jugs, but they don't say something like that, but I mean, if it's a toy, you're basically shipping air, and the molding is very small. Injection molding, oh boy, that's hard. But because you can do that, but blow molding not. So we were fine. But we had a number of the buyers, virtual winners, saying, thank goodness this isn't injection molding because you can't really import blow molding because the freight costs kill you because you're shipping a crate that weighs 100 pounds and it's full of product. And so that's a very big factor, that and medical armor.
Mark, would you be able to paraphrase My question is, you were talking about private equity groups that are putting in 50% of their equity for 100% of their
A lot of them are doing 50. Some are saying put in 100, and then we'll refinance it later.
Now, are they expecting to refinance it at the same multiples and percentages that they're able to do it in the 05, 06 period, or was that an anomaly that is gone forever?
The question is, they're putting in 50% or 100% equity. They expect to refinance at the same levels as 4 or 5 years ago. They don't expect to refinance it at those same levels. They expect to refinance it at better than today, but they don't expect to refinance it at the same levels. They think they'll be able to do it, say, 35, 40% equity and the balance being debt. I'm going to say the other factor they see is that although banks will make loans, and they're more conservative loans, say 2.5 times EBITDA, 3 for some big deals when it's real safe, but it's definitely 1 full turn lower than it was before, under any circumstances, 1 to 1.5 turns lower. But the banks are so careful about due diligence right now. They are so worried about opening the paper and then saying, do you mean there was a study that said the real estate wasn't worth this, or there was a problem with this, we checked. So they're so careful that the due diligence takes so long that it kills a lot of deals. So they figure that if they can get the deal closed, then they go to banks where they're not with a gun to their head, because the minute you go to a bank and say, can't you do it faster? You know how that goes over with banks. What are you trying to do? We're going to take this very carefully. And it just kills the ability to do the deal. It makes leverage that much harder to get. So that's another factor. They think if they can get better terms later, but also then they can bring in 3 or 4 banks, then they can have bid against each other, or then if it takes an extra month for due diligence, it's okay, and they can get a much better deal even today under those circumstances, rather than if they said, here's the term sheet, we'll have 1 month to close when we accept it. That makes sense, right? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mark, finishing up, when you start a profile of the industry that's involved, do you see any trends regionally or size? Profile you've seen change, say, 3 years ago. And also, do you see any effect of sort of the baby boomer effect that it tends to be in the 60s? You see more business starting to have for sale as the others are getting older?
We take those in reverse order. We always have people retiring, and we definitely have people who wanted to retire for the last 2 years but couldn't. And that's the biggest single factor in pent-up supply. We have a lot of situations in-house where they wanted to do it, and we feel like we're splitting our own throats saying, for the last 2 years saying, this really isn't the time. You really ought to wait. You're not going to hit your expectations. It's going to be heartbreak. It's going to get your people all exercised. Just wait. And now, why are you waiting? My wife's angry with me. We want to move. You get a lot of that. So those people now, and those are the ones who are so worried about the capital gains taxes going up. Wow, between now and get out and like golf and capital gains taxes, and we're going to get maybe 80% or 90% of what we would have gotten. They want out. As far as sectors, the biggest change I see around here is that we have a lot of companies around here that are automotive related, and some wonderful technologies that work hard. It's very hard if it's domestic automotive. It can work, but it's just that's an enormous chunk. And unfortunately, a lot of industries serve indirectly. I mean, some metals companies that make metal and then sell to producers who make components. That's just very hard. And if they're worth less than they would have been worth if they made products for almost anybody else. That's the biggest factor. On the positive side, plastics, which is a big industry around here, great place to be. The world loves plastic. That's the future. I mean, they all saw The Graduate and they believe it. And that's a wonderful place to be. And frankly, I think it's interesting. More people work in plastics in Northeast Ohio than work in metal. It's a bigger employer, and yet we moan and groan about, oh, the metal stamper. Well, no. That metal stamper is having problems because the part is now made out of plastic that it used to make, and there are more people making that. So plastics has become just a very high area, and I don't think we around here appreciate how world-class we are and admired for our plastics know-how. I mean, Silicon Valley makes software, we make plastics. And they mire us for plastics the way we mire them for that. And we see a big change in that. We also see around here a lot of medical, every kind of medical device companies, service companies, information companies, and that's another big strength around here, which we don't seem to, we just take for granted because it's there. But it's a very good area for us.
So recently, there have been like California, Florida, places that they ever had problems. Otherwise, you know, have sales.
People who just wanted to get out of the Midwest or get out of Cleveland or get out of Ohio, by and large, they did it over the years. We don't see a big change in that just recently. I mean, if they didn't like the weather, they probably left before now. Interesting comment we get from a lot of people who used to be very upset about the labor situation here. It's actually a whole lot better. Unions are a lot more reasonable to deal with. I mean, they see what the world is, and they're not crazy. And there's a lot more flexibility in dealing with that. People aren't happy about taxes in the state, but at least they've come down a little bit. And as compared to some other industrial states, they're not that bad. But there's just people who just want to get out of the Midwest or get out of Ohio or get out of Cleveland. By and large, that's happened, and we don't see a real big change in that. Yes?
Could you give a quick snapshot of your target?
Quick snapshot of our target industry, Western Reserve Partners. We have been in business almost 6 years. It'll be 6 years on the 4th of July. We signed the papers that day, Independence Day. In fact, we celebrate by having fireworks all over town on the day we formed our firm. We have 24 people, same as a year ago. We didn't cut back through all this. We mostly focus on things that are big in the Midwest. We are very strong in manufacturing of all types, industrial distribution. Those are two core areas for us. Capital goods, machinery, we understand those areas real well. One of our partners, Dave Dunstan, has spent his whole career in consumer products and retailing, so we do a lot of work there. We also are doing a lot of real estate. Vic Ferris is a real estate expert, so restructuring of real estate, buying real estate, REITs, that type of thing. We're doing a lot more medical. We have a big medical practice now, and ironically, a lot of bankruptcy restructuring, which cuts across everything. So basically, the industries in the Midwest are what we do. Things we don't do particularly well. I mean, if it's an internet communications company, we're not really. That's a California thing or a Boston thing. That's not really our area. But things that we do in the Midwest are what we understand real well. We do about from a size standpoint on M&A deals, about 60% of our business are transactions valued between $25 and $100 million. About 20% of the deals we do are greater than $100 million size, and about 20% are smaller than 25. And usually the smaller ones are around here someplace. In Timbuktu, it's kind of hard to do that size. And I'll cut it another way. About a third of our business is within an hour of this spot. About 50% of our business is in the rest of Ohio and contiguous states, and the remainder is, I think that makes it 6 left, is just scattered around the country, everywhere, from Vancouver to Boston to Oklahoma, and we're doing one right now in Florida. I mean, they're just sort of all over the place. But they're usually people who make things, because that's what we know.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Hold your applause. Yeah.
Do you see, you mentioned about individual taxes and the capital gains taxes going up, et cetera. What's your take on just business taxes in general down the road?
What's my take on business taxes in Ohio or just overall?
Overall. And the impact that might have on M&A.
Well, first of all, locally in Ohio, the top rate we pay on personal investment statewide is 5.9 and change, 5.925, I think it is. which is not bad compared to most Midwestern states, but it's terrible compared to Texas and Florida and Nevada and Washington, where they have no state income tax, or New Hampshire. I think New Hampshire has none or almost none. So we're not that far out of box with industrial states. We also have taxes. I mean, read the taxes. I think Shaker Heights taxes. You add it all up, and it's a lot. That is hurting us, and has continued to hurt us over the years. Business taxes go. We've got high corporate income taxes in this country relative to other countries, and the problem is it hurts our exports because other countries raise a lot of money through the value-added tax, VAT. So, and the reason that helps is if they make a machine and then they ship it off to Japan, the 10% or 15, whatever it is, VAT tax gets forgiven. They never have to pay that. That goes over and is paid by the Japanese or the Chinese or whoever the customer was. But if a product comes in from another country, we slap that tax on, which kind of equalizes. We don't do that, which shoots our exports, imports in the foot. What we really should do is have a much higher value-added tax and lower corporate income taxes, and that would do wonders for our export. Because I can tell you, from having been expatriated in Italy, you ship a product and the VAT tax is forgiven. But yet if our competitor in America tried to bring a product over here, the Italian government would add a VAT tax, which is absolutely backwards. So although our corporate taxes are not high by historical levels, it's the wrong tax. And when we're so worried about balanced trade, it's the wrong tax. It's encouraging people not to export and encouraging people to buy imports, and we want it to do just the opposite.
Thank you, Mark.
Me's copying this all down. He's going to come back to me 3 years from now and say, oh, wait a minute. 3 years ago, he says all that of that. So I just hope I'm still standing to be able to answer his question.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thanks for having me.